there's a lot of pointing at the chairs, pointing at the pulpit, pointing at the pulpit, right? But I think we got to take some accountability, right? The pastors and the leaders. I think we got to take some accountability for what we're seeing right now in the church. So, I think what's happening is, like I always say this, and you've heard me say this before, right? I feel that the greatest threat to the American church is the American pulpit.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think it is the pulpits that's doing the greatest amount of damage to the church. In fact, a lot of time people are always talking about Satan's attacks on the church, so we point the finger at the devil all the time, right? But when you read the New Testament, we look at some of the warnings from Paul or some of the warnings from John. Their biggest warnings was not about Satan, right? Their biggest warnings was not about the demonic. Their biggest warnings was, and I'll paraphrase, when I leave,
That's right.
I know that ravenous wolves will come in behind me, would not spare the flock. And so their biggest warning was about the pulpit. It was about the shepherds, both shepherds that have lost their way and shepherds that God did not call. And that was their biggest warning. And so I think it's important for us to establish that. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now in the body of Christ, I think a lot of it has to fall at the feet of people that sit in our seats, right? It has to fall at the feet of all of us, the shepherds. How are we stewarding God's bride? How are we stewarding the proclamation, or how are we stewarding the word? And I think it has to start there, right? And I think this is what you're alluding to, the brokenness you feel when you look at the shepherds and how they're handling God's flock. Let me tell you where my brokenness begins, right? So my brokenness begins over the state of the church, and I think this is very important. In December 2018, Lena and I was in Israel, and we was there for maybe about 10 days, toured the whole nation from the northern parts of the nation, the Golden Heights, all the way down to the south, to the Dead Sea. I had an encounter with you and I've talked about this. I had an encounter there in Israel that changed my life, changed my preaching, changed my perspective about church, changed my perspective about God. It was in that trip in Israel when I had an encounter like what Isaiah had, when I realized God was supremely holy.
Yeah.
And that he had given me a clear charge to come back to the United States and to cry aloud, right? And so I had an encounter with God at the Garden Tomb in Israel in December 2018 that changed my whole life. I would never be the same. I feel like a man died there, right? I feel like a man died in Israel and a different man came back to the United States, if that makes sense. But this is what opened my eyes. It was a